Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. We're breaking down the basics of all political issues and current political events so that you get to decide. Coming to you from the largest policy conference in the country in Washington, D.C. My guest today, the incomparable and truly wonderful Alan Sears. Alan's the founding director of Alliance Defending Freedom, the president, CEO, and general counsel of ADF. He built this team committed to a comprehensive legal strategy that includes training, funding, and legal advocacy, resulting in 52 victories at the United States Supreme Court. Under Sears' leadership, ADF attorneys won more than 3 out of 4 cases in which they participated. ADF has also funded more than 3,000 grants and legal projects for allied lawyers and organizations. Beginning with the launch of ADF in 1994, Alan provided strategic leadership in the training of over 1,900 lawyers from 45 countries through the one-of-a-kind ADF Legal Academy, designed to ensure attorneys are fully equipped to defend religious liberty, the sanctity of life, marriage, and family. These attorneys have reported more than $200 million in pro bono dedicated time. Alan's remarkable work has resulted in the graduation of more than 1,800 outstanding law students, representing 227 schools and 21 countries from the world-class Blackstone Legal Fellowship Leadership Training Program. Alan, that is quite a resume. I am so honored to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Well, you're very kind to have me, Kyle, and delighted to be here to talk about some of these issues that are very big and very important in our world right now.
So true. We have a lot to get to. But I just mentioned the part of your bio that's so remarkable, these statistics about Blackstone. Can you tell my listeners a little bit more about that program and your involvement in it?
Yeah, the Blackstone Legal Fellowship was something that actually started from a broken heart. When I went to law school, I was naive, and probably like a lot of the young people that are listening to us right now, you have ideas and dreams and thoughts about what you want to do. They still ask me, and I'm 73, I don't mind saying, people still ask me, what are you going to do when you grow up? And when you're in your 20s especially, you get asked that question. And for some people, it's kind of a confrontation. For other people, it's something they get really excited to talk about. But I wanted to be a lawyer. And I had dreams and visions about all these wonderful good things I might be able to do in the world as a lawyer. And I enrolled in law school. And I discovered there was a huge disparity between what I thought law school would be about, how I would be taught, what I would learn, and what really happened in real life. And I realized there was a real disconnect between my vision, my dream, and what I had to go through to become a lawyer. And this was probably not real smart on my part, but I actually started confronting some of the professors. I thought they were just dead wrong on some of the things they were teaching about how they viewed the Constitution and other things. And I discovered there weren't many people that agreed with my viewpoint, and most people just sat silently. And so I discovered at some point I'm pretty lonely in terms of finding people that share my heart, share my views. And so I began to think about, we need an organization, we need some kind of thing to create the word fellowship, to have a place for like-minded people to come together, to know they're not alone anymore, and also to help form the people in being able to discuss these topics. I mean, from whatever philosophy or viewpoint you come from, it's a little hard to argue your position if you really don't know the facts, don't know the issues. And I discovered I really had even though I'd been a history major, I was very concerned, interested in the topic, I realized I was really unprepared to discuss the founding history of the country, to discuss the Constitution, even though I didn't think what I was being taught was right. And that kind of launched me into a lifelong project of reading several thousand books, going to some graduate school classes, a lot of other things. But so this dream, fast forward, when we launched ADF in 1993, I presented the idea of a fellowship for law students to the founders that worked with me. They thought it sounded like a good idea. Alan, to go raise the money and find out a way to do it, and you can do it. You have our permission. And so we launched in the year 2000 what we now call the Blackstone Legal Fellowship. It's a 9-week summer program that prepares people for a lifetime relationship. And the key, Kyle, is lifetime and relationship. And so we do 9 weeks. We do 3 weeks. We do 2 weeks in the classroom. Intense discussion about different topics: Constitution, history, a lot of things about how you integrate your faith 24/7 into your life and your work. And then several weeks out in the field, working with real live lawyers, so to speak, different causes, different cases. And finally, a final week in the classroom. And we call those phases 1, 2, and 3. And then you have phase 4, which is the rest of your life. The first hire I made in doing this program was an alumni director. I had no students, no faculty, and no funding, but I hired an alumni director because the idea was we wanted to create this. Now, God's blessed us. Since the number you even gave in the bio, we now have 3,000 people who have been through the Blackstone Legal Fellowship. They're scattered across the globe. We've seen them now get involved in every aspect of life. Hundreds of them have served as law clerks to federal, local, and state judges. We have many others who served in presidential administrations, all the way from the White House to the Departments of Justice, Health and Human Services, Labor, in state attorneys general's office. We now have these young men and women who are teaching in law schools. And the basic idea is to create a group of people who are committed to justice, who are committed to righteousness, who are committed to seeing that law is really about a just and a good society for the flourishing of all people.
It's just remarkable. I mean, the foresight that you had back then to start this in 2000 is filling maybe more of a need today than you even realized then, because we have educational institutions across this country now that we know have been teaching some things that maybe we weren't realizing were being taught. Some themes have emerged. And so the fact that these law students can be together in community and fellowship and be on each other's page in connection and that going forward into their career paths is really a remarkable service you're providing to them.
Well, this is where I think providence comes into play, because obviously, as I said, it started with my individual broken heart, and maybe I had to be broken to recognize there was a need. And, you know, a lot of us in our life have different experiences that are unpleasant.
Sure.
Rocky roads, as some people say, that lead us to better places. And if I'd had a great law school experience, you know, out partying, having a lot of fun all the time, never thinking about these issues, there'd probably not be any Blackstone. But as you say, today, just in the last few years, several of these Blackstone fellows, you know, obviously starting in 2000, we have people that are getting a lot of experience now. And we have judges on the federal bench, federal trial courts, federal appellate courts. I hope to see some on the Supreme Court someday. We've got them in the state courts, these different places. And as you mentioned, in education, actually, Alliance Defending Freedom, both during my tenure as president and CEO, and now since I've stepped down, continues to be involved in a whole array of things relating to education, all the way from this intrusion of men trying to be involved in women's sports, which is really a very serious and very sad issue, where we have women now losing scholarships, the whole purpose of Title IX being defeated, where we have young women who've been seriously, perhaps for life, physically injured, playing with outsized people who don't belong in the same arena, to content of what's being taught in the classroom, all sorts of, for lack of a better term, propaganda, miseducation on many different topics, and the right of parents to direct the upbringing of their children. And I know some of your audience are not in the category of being parents yet. Maybe they haven't reached that stage where they're either having children or even interested in having children at this point. But for those that are, you certainly know that you want to have clear direction, clear knowledge of what your children are being taught. And one of the things that a number of our young lawyers and Blackstone Fellows have been involved in the educational arena is just winning back the right for parents to know what is being taught in the schools that they're funding. Can you imagine that you pay for something, with your taxes, or even in some semi-private situations, you pay for something, and then they tell you you're not allowed to know about what goes on there, and you're not allowed to know what your child does during the day when you drop them off. I think even some of the most, wherever you're at on the scale of liberal, conservative, whatever you call it, I think we can all agree that parents should have some knowledge about what goes on with probably the dearest people in their life, their children.
Yeah. A lot of big moral and cultural legal questions are coming up through the courts, especially in this latest presidential administration. Many of them you just mentioned, Roe being returned to the states, Title IX issues, immigration issues, parental rights, religious persecution, January 6th. There are just so many things. The lawfare that we saw as a nation against a former president, and now there has been a change in administration. So glad that Blackstone and ADF is helping to properly equip these law school students to take these on. But it just has seemed to me, and I would love your take on this, Alan, that we have just had a tsunami of really intricate, difficult legal situations make their way through the courts and all the way up to the Supreme Court in these last few years. And everyone wants to know what's going to happen, right? We all want you to predict the future, but also we know that the wheels of justice move slowly. This is not something that's going to happen. These things won't get resolved overnight just because there's been a change in presidential administration. How do you see things in the context of those issues that are coming before the courts, and who's in the courts, what our judges in place are right now? How do you see things going forward in the beginning of Trump's second presidential administration?
Well, of course, we can't predict the future, and we can't predict the outcome of almost any individual case. And maybe another kind of higher level comment I'll make, and then I'll address a few things. I'm often asked, does law follow culture, or does culture follow law? And the answer I give is yes.
That sounds about right.
Because they become so intertwined in so many ways. And in so many of the things that happen in the courts, particularly that led up to this era, were because we had people, many judges, who said, we're not going to be tethered to the written words of the Constitution. We're going to look at how we can take the Constitution and we can sort of mold it, how we can apply it and make it fit to the circumstances to get the outcome we want. When I was in law school, they had a term for this. They called it the living and breathing Constitution.
Right.
That phrase has kind of gone out now. There's people that use terms like progressive originalism, constructionalism, some of these different terminologies. But really, one of the most fundamental issues when we talk about any issue in any of the areas you mentioned is, do we have judges that will apply the facts of the situation to the laws as they are written and the Constitution as it is written? Now, again, I don't care what your philosophy is. I don't care if you're the most libertine, most liberal progressive, or you're the most conservative, the most orthodox, whatever they want to call, archaic, right-wing, whatever labels people want to have. One of the most important things for our society with the rule of law is to have certainty, to have a clear view of when you engage in these battles, how will things turn out and will they be fairly decided? And that's why Alliance Defending Freedom and the various organizations that we're always allied and working with always struggle to fight for what we call constitutional originalism. This is the concept that the founders of the Constitution, they were very well educated people, chose certain words that had meanings that everyone could understand. And if it's an archaic word, if it's an old word not used much today, like for example, in the Declaration, we talk about how there are certain rights that are inalienable. That was a common word in that area. And if we don't know what it means, we don't go look at some made up new meaning. What did that word mean in 1776? And what we find when we look up that word is that inalienable means a right that is granted to people because of their nature, as it says in the Constitution, granted by nature, by God, and nature's God. And it means that it's a right that is granted because you're human. You cannot have that right taken away from you. It's inherent because you're a human person. And so when we look at other aspects of the Constitution, Kyle, we want to apply the same kind of principles. And so when we talk about law, so you mentioned Roe v. Wade. The Dobbs case, which Alliance Defending Freedom was very much involved in, ADF actually wrote the statute on behalf of some legislators in Mississippi that was adopted by the Mississippi, Utah, and another legislature that then became the basis for the litigation now known as Dobbs that reversed Roe v. Wade. Now, the biggest probably misconception about Roe v. Wade is that there was a right to abortion in the Constitution. Now, interestingly, many of your viewers may remember the name Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG. I noticed in D.C. at a number of the tourist shops, they sell little bobblehead dolls of her. They've got her wisdom, her books. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a great advocate of abortion. She wanted almost unlimited abortion to be lawful in the country. But even Ruth Bader Ginsburg recognized and spoke publicly about the fact that Roe v. Wade was not a sound decision. It was not firmly integrated in the Constitution, and she actually, I don't mean to put words in her mouth, but she more or less predicted that Roe v. Wade would not stand. Because if you're going to make a constitutional decision at the court, it needs to be based on what's actually there. And if you go back, Roe v. Wade was a fabrication. The first case was called Griswold v. Connecticut, and there were 3 or 4 in between, where the court created a concept relating to the right to privacy that they said was based upon the penumbra, sort of a shadow between the 9th and the 10th Amendment. This is the language of the court, not mine. And so they found something that nobody had discovered before for 200 years, and they kept building and building on that block. And so it was uncertain. How did they find this? So when Dobbs came along, there's this like radical reaction, and all Dobbs said is, that's not in the Constitution. And if you want to deal with the issue of abortion on a government level to protect the right to life, the innocent, the unborn, the preborn children, you've got to do it a different way than a decree from the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, people who don't understand law, don't understand history, and think that that was an embedded right went nuts. And you can understand why they did, because they thought something's being taken away from them. Well, actually, they never had it in the first place. And so when we look at any of these issues, Kyle, the first thing we want to do when we talk about specifics is applying that fair and objective standard so that everyone involved in the case gets justice. And if it's a statutory thing, if you don't like the law, we have a legislative process to change it. If you don't like the Constitution, we have a constitutional amendment process that's been exercised 20 plus times by the people of this nation to alter the Constitution. But what disturbs me greatly is when we have cases that make things up out of whole cloth, because then nobody has the assurance of a protection of rights, because it's about who's in power, it's about who's on a court, rather than having a firm standard that all people can see. And the last thing I'll address that you asked was about lawfare. And this is a commonly used term about taking agencies of the government to settle political scores. Now, quite frankly, this is the way the third world, this is the way, sadly, a lot of, and we've got many good friends in Latin and South America, and it's how some of those countries have had out of control governments have had dictatorships. They use law. This is how the old Soviet Union, other places, deal with their enemies. They use, quote, legal process to put people off the map, whether by civil means of taking their assets away or criminal means of up to incarceration to shut off the opposition. And it's time that lawfare end for everybody on all sides of the equation. That is not an American way. It's unconstitutional. It's improper. It's unlawful. It violates natural law.
Yeah. Seems to be that there is one political party that has not fully realized that they are implementing lawfare while crying about lawfare potentially being implemented on them.
Well, you know, the tragedy is, as you say, there have been those who've been using this, and because they've been doing it to someone else, they now fear it can be flipped and used on them. And I don't know how partisan we want to get here. I think our listeners know who we're talking about, what we're talking about. But it's absolutely improper to use government to settle criminal laws, to settle political differences. It's improper to use nefarious means of applying even civil laws to settle political differences. That's why we have the voting booth. And if you don't like the way the outcome is, as long as it's a fairly administered election without theft and all the deception, that kind of thing, as long as it's a fair election, we as Americans are called to live with the result. And I know there's a lot of people that don't like the result of the last election, but it was an astounding number, 312 electoral votes and a 5 million vote majority for the President of the United States. That hasn't happened since Ronald Reagan's day. And there have been people who've been, again, they didn't like the results in some earlier elections. So they said, let's abolish the Electoral College, which is how you count the votes from different states, which was created by our founding fathers, like the U.S. Senate, to make sure that smaller states and people that lived in smaller states didn't lose all of their rights. And now since we have a president who won both the popular vote and the Electoral College, those cries to abolish the Electoral College have sort of died away for a while. But we'll see those again. Because again, it's about if we don't like the result, let's change the rules. Let's apply them to benefit our side, not about caring for the general welfare of the people of all different persuasions.
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of it this time. And then, of course, they do a 180 when the circumstances are changed. They don't seem too bothered by that.
When I was in law school, they had a great adage on that. They said, don't confuse me with the facts. I know what I believe.
I just did a great episode with somebody talking about that, about how culturally we have adopted this concept of my truth or your truth versus the absolute truth.
Well, again, back to applying that to law, unfortunately, we had a number of judges appointed for a while in our country, and we still have some of these on the bench, who don't believe in applying the Constitution as it is written. They frankly look at it and they say, how can we interpret it to get the outcome that we want? And for those who think I'm overstating, I've actually, at least in one case in my lifetime, have a judge tell me that.
Wow.
That individual judge was determined that whatever argument I could make in front of them, they were going to produce this result. So basically, don't waste your time. Because they said, the way that you argue the Constitution, blah, 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 is won't produce the right result in fairness to blah, blah, blah. I won't tell you the case, but that's the only time I've had somebody candidly admit it. But we've also seen in the results where judges write these lengthy soliloquies about philosophy that have nothing to do with the facts or the law in the particular case.
Have you seen that shift taking place? You are one of our best and brightest legal minds in the United States. You have your thumb on the pulse of who is in these judgeship positions. I mean, is the Constitution vulnerable going forward? We'll have a Trump presidency, his last for 4 years, and those years are going to go by quickly. You know, he can only accomplish so much in that time. Is the Constitution safe?
Well, you know, first of all, there are 9 Supreme Court justices. There's 167 federal appellate court judges in the country, and there are 94 federal districts with roughly 700 U.S. district judges. So that's a tiny number of people out of the entire population. But I'll give you a couple other numbers. The U.S. Supreme Court typically in a year hears 70 to 80 cases. There's maybe 1,000, 2,000 cases that come before them, but they decline to hear them. The only thing that the Constitution requires the court to take are a couple of things like conflicts between states, but say between Michigan and Ohio. Not the football game, but the legal battle.
Sure.
The federal courts of appeals in November of 2024 had 32,000 pending criminal and civil matters before them. So these 167 appellate judges that are authorized slots decide in over a period of time, 30, 40,000 cases. You can have a single appellate judge who will decide 5,000 or 6,000 cases in her lifetime. And they have a much broader footprint on the law in this country. 6,000 cases probably trumps the 70 or 80 cases a year that the Supreme Court does by far. So, and then the U.S. district courts in November of 24 had 700,000 pending criminal and civil cases. These are rough numbers. And so in those 94 districts, you think about, you put all this together, you're getting close to 1 million cases, and only 70 during that year are being decided at the highest level. So every federal judgeship is very important. And for the people that are involved in the case, the plaintiffs, the defendants, depending, of course, if it's a criminal case, it's the United States, everyone's entitled to a fair trial. Everyone's entitled to fair administration of justice. And that's why I go back to the principle we talked about earlier, that you've got to have certain standards that apply to everybody, everywhere, all the time, regardless of who you are. This is why, in these kind of old illustrations, you always see Lady Liberty or the Statue of Justice, and she's usually blindfolded. She's unaware, because the idea is it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you're whatever color tone God gave your skin to be, whatever background you come from, that you have fair and equitable justice. And without that neutrality in the application, we're all hurting big time. So when people say, how do you, Alan, how if you had a magic wand to pick judges, how would you pick a judge? And I'd say I'm not really so much interested in like their political background and all these sort of things. What I'm interested in is a woman or man who is committed to the contract of the Constitution. Because really, when a judge takes the oath of office, they're making a covenant between themselves. I think God also comes into play, but they're making a covenant that they will adhere to that Constitution and that they will be blind, that they won't, they don't take sides. The side they take is justice. Yeah. And as we've departed from that, and we've seen lots of departures from that, our people, the people of this country, become disaffected. And I think a lot of the social disorder that we've had is because a sense that justice has been fleeting. And one of the things that I'm hoping that we see with this next administration is to see more judges. President Trump, during his first term, appointed 54 of the 167 appellate judges in the country. The Obama administration, by comparison, in 8 years, only appointed 55. Now, as President Trump entered office, there were only 2 vacancies of those 167 because President Biden had filled the ones in between. So we don't know how many vacancies will occur, but one of the things that everyone listening to this program ought to do is when you hear or you learn that there's a vacancy in a federal court in your area, get involved. Don't just think this is some far off thing that some politician you've never heard of has to say. Every single person can have an influence. And I know that several very bad judges have been blocked from advancing because of action of a fairly small number of people getting alert, advising their friends, getting out, on all the, I guess it's now X, it used to be Twitter.
Yes, very effective.
In my day, but all the different social media, Facebook, et cetera, let people know about these things. And when you have a good candidate, get behind them, persevere. Yeah. And don't just let these things happen to you. Be part of it.
Absolutely. And besides going on social media or being vocal or advocating against or for those federal judge candidates, what would you tell people, how would you direct people to best be influential in speaking out?
Well, on any topic, I always think it's critical that you know what you're talking about. But these are not complicated things to research. Most of the time when you have a nominee for a judge, they have a track record. And the people that support that judge are going to put out, obviously, the best track record they can in favor of their candidate. Those that oppose are going to so carefully study and also sort through what are the kind of source background. Do they have unattributed quotes about how this person did some nefarious thing in their past that isn't documented? Or, nobody can predict how a judge will rule on a particular case. But what you can predict is if you have somebody who's a solid citizen, who is committed to the rule of law and the Constitution, versus somebody that's demonstrated that they want outcomes favoring something that's unfair to others.
Yeah. Alan, you do this better than almost anyone, so I want to ask you.
You're very kind with all these compliments will get you everywhere. So you're very kind.
Well, I'm going to keep giving them because we think the world of you. You're a pretty remarkable human. What we also saw in this last election cycle was a lot of change within political parties. We saw the Republican Party platform become much more general and broad. The party itself become big tent, so to speak. Trump sort of assembled this motley crew-like group of Democrats, independents, libertarians around him, including Republicans. He brought home a lot of people who had criticized him and his administration the first go-around. And we saw the Democrat Party go to the outskirts of issues to be very progressive, especially on the issue of life and abortion, and really use that as their anchor. So we saw a lot of shifting going on, a lot of changes within both parties, and of course saw how that turned out. It turned out very profoundly in one direction. What do you think is going to happen going forward with each party? And also I want to kind of relate this to something that you brought up that again, you do better than anyone else, which is create organizations and conservative organizations that, as you said, stand the test of time. Because we are seeing a lot of moving parts and shifting and morphing, but you know the way forward to build something that lasts, and I'd love to hear from you on it.
Okay, there's a lot of questions
I know.
in there, Kyle. First
I like to pack it all.
Well, I'll give you a few thoughts. First of all, on the broadness of the appeal in this past campaign. A guy named Richard Nixon, who a lot of people may not think real well of when they hear that name, and maybe a lot of your listeners' parents weren't even alive when Richard Nixon was president. But Richard Nixon proposed for the Republican Party something called the Party of the Open Door. And he actually, he had a Shaker background. And whether you like him again or you think he's the worst person that ever walked, he had a concept that the Republican Party could do something different than the Democrat Party. and that is open the door to attract people from all faith backgrounds, all walks of life, and all philosophies. He said it should not matter any of these background things because we're Americans. Now, that got kind of lost in some of the things that Nixon was involved in and so forth, but there was a strain of that stayed in the party. Ronald Reagan, fast forward, also broadened his outlook. He had a lot of blue-collar people, a lot of people that union people, others that had not been. Ronald Reagan always said, I didn't leave the Democrat Party, it left me. Yeah. Okay, fast forward to this most recent election. I would make the argument that it was not about Donald Trump versus Vice President Harris. I'd make the argument that it was about policy and issues. And one party had policies and issues that opened that door, that said we want people, again, regardless of any of these external factors, these things that in the eyes of God don't matter. We want everyone who cares about raising their children. We care about people that care about having a strong economy, lower taxes, the whole array of issues. And we don't want to label people. And another party basically said, we're going to have very different views on many of those issues, and ignored many of those issues. And so everything I've read, and I'm obviously one of 350 million Americans, but everything I've seen, everything I've studied, says that this election was decided on an array of policies, not on personalities. In fact, there are a number of people who've been prominently featured in interviews who said, I didn't like Donald Trump personally, but I loved everything Donald Trump stood for. And so I voted for the policies. But okay, now getting into building organizations and organizations that last. For those of you that are thinking about either getting involved with something or want to start something, as Kyle said, I started the organization called Alliance Defending Freedom today. It started with one person, with me. And I was very blessed to have a lot of people who joined and supported with us. But, and I now, in my post-ADF life, I actually do mentoring and training and a lot of individual work with CEOs, primarily first-time CEOs of either existing or new organizations. And I always say you start with two things. You start with a vision and with values. And you need to have a clear vision of what it is you want to achieve, what it is you want to accomplish. And then you need to have a clear set of values about how you're going to run, how you're going to lead, how you're going to administer that organization. If you want to build a team, if you want to build a core of supporters, you need to have, like we talked about in the presidential election, you need to have a vision that attracts others, and you need to be able to explain that vision. This isn't just a matter of imaging and branding and finding little key words to communicate things. This is, what are you about? What is the change you want to bring, and how are you going to make this world better in your lifetime with what it is that you're all about? In the case of Alliance Defending Freedom, we had a very simple a few words that described our vision. We wanted to keep the door open for the gospel. That's not complex, and maybe for people that aren't familiar with that phrase, you could add a few more words. We wanted to keep the legal door open for the good news of Jesus Christ, the gospel, so that people could live and follow that truth in their daily life, and they would not be punished for wanting to communicate that, wanting to adhere to that, wanting to follow that, and letting the conscience of their faith, the conscience in their heart, be followed, and not do things that violated that conscience. As I say, it was very simple: keep the door open for the gospel. And then we had some specific areas where we wanted to work to do that in some specific ways. We talked about strategy, training, and funding. For example, I always like threes because they kind of stick to your head, and maybe like the Trinity, they're Father, Son, Holy Spirit, they're easy to remember. But so you have a clear vision that's easy to communicate, and then values. And the first value I always say is, how are you going to treat your team? And one of our core values at Alliance Defending Freedom from the beginning was something I learned from watching one of my mentors, Ed Meese, with Ronald Reagan, making stars of others. They didn't use that phrase. Some months ago, for your listeners, they remember Quincy Jones, the great, maybe your listeners won't know Quincy Jones, but they would certainly know a lot of the music he wrote and a lot of people he helped with. One of my favorite headlines in one of Quincy Jones' obituary stories was how he dedicated his life to making others better, which is the same thing. So we said, when you make stars of others, the first thing you look at is you bring people on your team and you grow your team, how do you invest in your team members to make them into stars? It's not about the CEO, it's not about the leader, it's about a team. And so you need to have, as part of your values of your organization, a plan on how you are going to develop every team member. And so a lot of things that we put into effect with Blackstone Legal Fellowship externally were things that we had used internally in working to develop the Alliance Defending Freedom team. So, and I always like things to be simple. And how many times have you walked into a company and read their mission statement on the wall?
I don't know.
Well,
Zero?
Zero. And if you see one, you don't read them because it's gobbledygook.
They're long, yeah.
They always talk about all these different things. And one of my favorite words in the values of every organization, I don't know of a single one that doesn't put the word excellence into the deal. And I've asked numerous of these young CEOs, I say, okay, you've given me your thing here. It looks really pretty. And of Dunder Mifflin. I don't know how many of your viewers remember The Office.
We all remember The Office.
Well, if you go to Amazon, maybe I'm promoting a company, but if you go to Amazon, you can order the Dunder Mifflin mission statement and put it on your wall. And you probably can sell as much paper as they sold in Dunder Mifflin, which in all the shows I ever watched, I don't think they ever sold a thing.
Nope.
They had a lot of internal politics.
Yeah.
But excellence is a big word in that phrase. So I want excellence too, but I say, I don't believe you can define excellence with words, but you can see it, you can smell it, you can taste it. So one of the things we did with Alliance Defending Freedom, because of some blessed relationships, we partnered with, I'll give another advertisement, with Ritz-Carlton LLC. And the Ritz-Carlton had a thing they developed called the New Gold Standard. They had concepts about ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. So I brought Ritz-Carlton trainers into Alliance Defending Freedom to train lawyers and team members on how to run a hotel. No, on how to live with excellence.
Yeah, smart.
So that literally when we designed, when we could finally afford and have an office building, we designed our restrooms and our lunchroom, and even down to that detail, in a way that would honor all the people that worked with us, provide safe, clean, pleasant places to work, and to show them that we thought they were stars. Yeah. So if you want to build an organization that lasts, those would be the two key words. We can go down to a lot of detail and specifics, but it's vision and values.
Love it.
And then those values have to be lived out every day at every level. And this is where also one of the tough parts of management is when you have team members that don't live up to the values, you need to be able to do proper correction and hopefully correction leading in the right direction.
So wise. I could talk to you all afternoon. I have so much that I want my listeners to hear from you, and I feel like we've just gotten started, but you have just a depth of knowledge and real wisdom to share. But I've got to let you go at some point, but I'm very hopeful that you will come back on the program again with me in the future, and we can keep digging into some of these topics, because you know so much.
If your viewers don't blow us up and tell you not to have me, I'd be glad to come back.
No, we love you and are just so thankful for you and to you. And I will say, on behalf of everyone that you have helped you have fought for, stood up for, and supported, and that ADF has as well. We just thank you, Alan, because God has really used your life to do tremendous and important work. So thank you.
Well, you're very kind. You know, the theme verse of Alliance Defending Freedom from day one is, without Christ, we can do nothing.
Yeah.
And so we give him the credit for all the good things that have accomplished, and for any of the dumb, stupid things, I take full blame.
Well, we'll take that and leave it there until next time. But thank you, Alan, for being with me today.
You.
Really appreciate it. You too. And thank you for joining us on this special episode of Politically Basic, coming to you straight from DC. We'll continue to break down the basics so you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.